This is Josh with Homesteading Family, and welcome to this week's episode of the Pantry Chat, Food for Thought. I've got a buddy of mine here that's been on with us before. Actually, we were talking about solar before. Today, we're going to talk about EMP and EMP Shields. Now, this is a subject I know very little about. It's something I've been interested in, and that it's worth exploring to me. And so hopefully this is going to be educational and inspiring for you guys as well. Tag's got a ton of experience here, both in solar and EMP. I'll tell you more about him in a minute, and I'm looking forward to jumping in. But first, we want to say thank you to our sponsors that help bring these podcasts and this video, if you're watching on YouTube, to you guys. And the sponsor today is Lehmans. Thank you, Lehmans. Before we begin today's podcast, we just want to say thank you. It's Lehmans' goal to equip you for whatever projects you might have next on your list. They've got everything from plant, plate, to pantry. That means they've got the gardening tools and the accessories to plant your garden, cooking, baking, and serving dishes to plate your produce, and food preservation supplies to fill your pantry. Now, they specialize in non-electric appliances. So if you live without electricity, or if you're in an area with frequent power outages, and I'll add, even if you are or aren't, having some analog tools and skills is very, very valuable. So it's important to have these backup strategies and tools, from gas refrigerators to wood heating, cook stoves, water pumps, composting, toilets. Lehmans is your one-stop shop. We'll leave you a link below for you to check them out. All right, so today we've got Tag here with us. Tag and his wife Bee live on an off-grid homestead in the beautiful Midwest. Through their efforts and those of their community, they are pursuing a life away from the system. Their journey focuses on food, energy, and financial independence. Now, Tag says he's a recovering financial executive. He spent 23 years of his life running financial holding companies. But when he was forced to mandate the vaccine for all of his employees, he opted out. He chose to exit the system and live a life done free, as he calls it, while starting a freesteading movement. Let's welcome Tag. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Hey, Josh, how are you? Good to see you again.
I am doing excellent. Like we were talking before we jumped on here, it's just like we're starting to roll in spring. We got spring fever. Can't quite get everything done, but the anticipation is building.
Boy, isn't that true? I'm looking out my window. There's still snow on the ground, but soon.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. Hey, before we get into EMPs and all that good stuff, what is freesteading? You started a freesteading movement. Sounds kind of like homesteading, but it must be a little bit different. So tell us a little bit about that.
So for me, I started as a prepper in this world and grew to be a homesteader.
Good job, by the way.
Yeah. And so from there, it really got, as I thought about it more and more, I thought that there was maybe another step behind that. And that is where I got out of the system. And so to me, homesteading, the natural evolution to it is freesteading, which is where, we just try to exit the system and we try to depend more on ourselves. So homesteading with sustainability, with off-grid living and all of those things. So I spend a ton of my time, focused on building community, becoming more resilient to the system. Not even to say that the system is bad, although, we could talk a whole show about that all by itself.
It's got its places.
Yeah. But just to say that I want to be dependent on me. I don't want to be dependent on all of the other games that are played. I just don't want to. I want to just take care of it for myself. So the freesteading movement has grown and grown and grown. And, right here, our community has grown, gone from just a couple farms to, now we have 2,000 acres of land and homesteads all around us and community buildings. Go ahead.
Let's clarify that, because you're talking about being dependent on you, but you're actually a huge proponent of community and you're building community. And so when you talk 2,000 acres, you're not talking about, I think, you having 2,000 acres. You're talking about community that you guys are building together. Many of you, non-religious, whatever, you tell us about it, because you're talking about a community that's coming together that's really successful.
Yeah. So like most people think of community like the intentional communities, you see on YouTube. And I consider us more of an intentional neighborhood. I own my land. I'm sovereign on my land. And we have no rules. It's nothing like that. But collectively, through voluntarism, we've gotten together for collective security. And security, most people think, beans, bullets. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about food security. I'm talking about energy security. I'm talking about water security. I'm talking about those types of issues. And so every year, it seems like there's 7 or 8 or 9 people who buy a 40 acre, 80 acre, 20 acre, 10 acre, whatever it is, somewhere around us. And then together we get together to see how we can become freer and freer and freer from the system. Now, I think you make a really, really good point there, though, that, it's kind of like choosing your master a little bit. I would rather put my faith in the people that I know and love, in my community members, than I would to put it in a system I have no control over. Yeah. And so that's how we do it. And, I get so many emails every single week that ask about what's the buy-in or what's the rules. There is none and there is none. That's the answer. We're here to live a life together and, accomplish the goal of getting free. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I know we'll get questions about it, and that explains a little bit. And it's just free. A bunch of people coming together.
Yep.
Community, is a lot of its location a lot of times, and you got people within a location that you're all working together towards common goals in general. And I think that's really, really cool. Let's see here. I want to remind everybody we're talking EMP today, but Tag is also a depth of knowledge about solar as well, and is part of a company called Grid Down. I won't say any more than that, but it's worth checking out. We've got a podcast on that. We'll leave you a link for it. But we're going a step further today to talk about EMPs and EMP Shields. So Tag, I want to just start from the ground up. I know nothing. I mean, I've heard of EMP. I know basically what it is, but I'd love for you to just take us through what is an EMP to begin with. What are we even talking about?
Yeah. So basically, and I'll try to say this in a way that's very common so everybody gets it.
Yeah. Give us the 5th grader version.
Yeah. So basically, an electromagnetic pulse is a wave of energy. Okay. Now, in some cases, it'll be multiple waves of energy, but let me just give you some examples of what an EMP could be. So like a lightning bolt, a lightning bolt is an example of an EMP, so is a CME, a coronal mass ejection, or a solar flare, right? The sun spitting off, a burst of energy. But what people maybe don't know is there's lots of other ones. You have dirty electricity coming from your electrical provider. We have surges coming from our electrical providers. Those also could be one, even all the way down to, did you know when you start your car, when it ignites your spark plugs, there's a super small electromagnetic pulse that goes on. Mm-hmm. So there's many of them, many different kinds of them.
So there's just a lot of natural reoccurring versions of these, from very small ones that probably are low to basically no impact on humans but natural ones that are fairly high impact.
Right. And the one big one I didn't mention right there, which is the one that most people are worried about, because it is, although a low probability event, it is a high impact event, is what's called a HEMP, a high altitude EMP, which is basically where a nuclear bomb would be detonated 300 miles above Kansas, Nebraska, somewhere like that, somewhere in the center of the United States. You wouldn't see it, you wouldn't feel it, you wouldn't hear it, none of those kind of things, but it would send down a series of waves of electricity. Now, the officials refer to those waves as the E1, the E2, and the E3. And each one of them have a different set of characteristics. And I'll cover them real quick if you'd like me to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very informative.
Okay, so an E1 basically is a super fast with lots of voltage wave that, kind of comes down upon you, but it's brief, right? And it's so fast, in fact, 90% of the speed of light. Okay, if you're talking about how fast it's moving.
That's fast.
That's right. It's hauling. And so it's very damaging because most surge arresters, things like that are made today, aren't built to deal with that type of speed. It's going to go right past your breakers. They won't react quick enough to the energy. And what happens is that energy then builds up, right? It collects in an antenna. So an antenna would be things like the power grid, right? The wiring, whatever it is, it will collect. It will then begin to heat up components in all kinds of devices, anything with a microchip on it, and that's the end of that.
So basically, it's going to be a surge of power. It's going to be fast and strong, and that's going to basically burn up certain components in whatever system.
Yeah, any microelectronics will be done, and it's just not coming back. I mean, it's just too much power too fast, you know. And so as soon as that's over, right? That's over just super, super quick. The next wave is what's called an E2. And we refer to this as a slow wave, but we put that into context. So from the beginning, it will start at 1 microsecond and it will be over, in a second. So, okay, they refer that to the slow. That's it's a lot slower than the first one, but it's very similar in its characteristics to a lightning bolt. Getting struck by lightning. It's a power surge. It's not as quick, and actually the easiest of all of the three to deal with from a surge suppression perspective. Many, surge suppression devices out there today will deal with it partially, although I'll tell you, I am unaware of any surge suppressor in reference to lightning or the E2 that will guarantee against like lightning strikes, right? Because they want to, if you read the actual warranty, most of them say, we don't cover against weather related items, or we don't cover against acts of God, or, those kinds of things. But this one isn't too hard to deal with. The real one that's hard to deal with is the E3. And so if you can think about a nuclear bomb going off in our atmosphere, what it's going to do, okay, it's going to flex, right, the magnetosphere. So it's going to go like this, right? Okay. And when it snaps back like that, it's going to create these waves. Okay. So these waves of energy, from the E3 coming in could last from a series of minutes to hours. So let me put that into perspective. Okay. So imagine, and according to military standard 188-125-1, which is the military standard on EMP, and 2, by the way, they also have a 2, but they say that in order to mitigate an EMP, you have to be able to deal with 50,000 volts per square meter. Okay. That's the standard. So if you can imagine 50,000 volts radiating into your house, the electric grid, all kinds of things for hours.
Sounds overwhelming.
Yeah. So the amount of damage that would cause, I mean, it would literally put us into the dark ages. There's just no way to deal with it unless we're using things like shunting, which is one of the things we use, or Faraday cages, or, there's different technologies out there. Filtering's another one that they use, to deal with it. But it is absolutely catastrophic, both on the E1 and the E3. Like as I mentioned, the E2 is a little easier to deal with. But again, I want to mention to everybody, this isn't fear, because at the end of the day, an EMP, a high altitude EMP, is literally a low probability, high impact event. Right. But it is so scary because if you think about the geopolitical climate and what goes on in the world, how do you take on the United States military? Well, you don't. Is really the short answer, right? In many cases. So this is a great way to have a big impact very quickly and really hurt the United States, or any country for that matter, ability to respond, ability to, run a factory, to produce electricity, to, the assembly lines, the trucks that are driving down the road. I mean, imagine if the trucks stopped coming.
Sure. Yeah. Crippling infrastructure.
Yeah.
Is what we're talking about here, the potential. So you talked a little bit about kind of the everyday, the regular occurrences, semi-regular natural occurrences of EMP. Then we have these kind of, remote, far out, but plausible. But if they do happen, they're going to be very serious. So low probability, as you said, but still probability. If it does happen, it's going to have serious consequences. How serious is the threat of EMP? And again, when we're saying EMP, we're talking not just the thing in the sky. We're talking all of these. What are the realities, the seriousness of the threats from your knowledge or experience?
Yeah. So let's start with the first one we talked about, which is, CME and solar flares, right? I mean, the best one, if you go back in history, was 1859, the Carrington event. You can read about it in history books, right? We had a big solar flare. It burned all the telegraph lines, burned a lot of the telegraph operators, but also it was so powerful. They were actually able to transmit with the lines disconnected through the atmosphere. And so it was a big deal back then. If the 1859 Carrington event happened today, it would fry everything. And again, we would be in the dark ages. And I'm going to tell you, the experts, it's not a matter of if. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Well, and so I think that's, I mean, to me, that's huge to draw out. You're talking a natural event that has happened, that humanity has experienced. And so while it's obviously a very rare type of event, it's happened. We've already experienced it. We just weren't technologically developed yet to the level that we are now. and that the statistics say, I think what you're saying is it is going to happen again at some time in the future.
Yeah, well, we get hit by solar flares all the time.
And this is natural event, right? This isn't usually what I hear people talking about when they talk EMP. And this is why people get conspiracy theorists and all. Yeah, well, that's, whatever. We're talking world powers, but here we're just talking the reality of a natural occurrence that is going to happen again at some time with some degree of probability.
Yeah, well, and like I said, we get hit by solar flares all the time. They're just, either they're hitting the wrong side of the earth, they're not strong enough, whatever it is. But I'll tell you, in 2014, we had a solar flare miss the world by 2 weeks. That was bigger than the 1859 Carrington event.
Yeah,
it just missed us in our orbit, and so it went by. But any of those would be gigantic. So again, I think, although 100% probable, it's not an everyday occurrence, right? They do say
20 years, 2 years, 100 years.
Right. So let's talk about lightning real quick. So I don't know if you know much about that. There's over $1 billion every single year paid in claims to lightning damage. Over 40 million strikes happen annually in the United States of America. It's a high probability. It's absolutely going to happen. And I don't know if the audience knows this, but a big lightning bolt can have 1 billion volts of electricity. That's a lot.
That's okay.
Yeah, and it's crazy. It's the way it happens. There have been cases, and we've studied this a lot at EMP Shield, but there have been cases where it's struck the ground and came up through the grounding rod into the house.
Heard of that.
And so it is absolutely 100%, going to happen. The other couple things that we talked about, let's talk about power surges real quick. They're becoming more and more common every day, and a percentage of the wildfires, like what happened in California, there was lots of studies that those started as a surge. And, electricity is just not clean. Every single house gets hit with an electrical surge every single day. That's just a fact. And most of them are just super small. You just don't notice them. If you ever in your house and look up and your lights flickered, that's usually a cause of a surge.
Okay.
So, but if that surge got big enough, right, it could cause immediate damage, but there's actually a bigger problem, which is the repeated elevation of surges, because we're getting more and more. Our electrical grid is stressed more and more, right? With whether it's the crypto mining, whether it's the electrical cars, the charging stations, all of it, right?
We're becoming more dependent on electricity. We're using more electricity, but we have not. I think most people know that we have not, for a variety of reasons within our country, kept up with demand. And so we're overtaxing the systems more and more, I think is what you're saying.
Yes. And one great thing about having some type of protection on there is you get to protect your investment. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. So those repeated surges shorten the life of your appliances. Those repeated surges shorten the life of everything in your house that gets the electricity. It's hard on it. And so, I have a lot of friends who have put surge suppression on things and go, man, it's cool. I'm not replacing a washing machine every 6 years anymore because it's not taking the beating that it would take, right? And so those, again, how likely are those? Well, they happen every day.
I got a question for you, and this is a little, it's relevant. It's a little to the side, but it's something just occurring to me. We're a big household. We use appliances hard. But we've had some instances, and we've got an oven, electric oven. And in the house that we bought, we used it up pretty quick. We bought a new one. And we bought a pretty nice one that we felt was well made, because we use things, our household uses things probably anywhere from 5 to 10x what an average household uses, just because of how many people in our house. Well, this oven, highly rated, high quality oven, I don't want to say what brand or anything. It's had problems from the beginning. Now, maybe it was just bad batch, but it's had challenges with the electronics from the beginning. And we just had like the actual temperature sensor go out for like some random, no reason. It's never overheated. Really, it was a really weird thing. You're making me wonder, and I'm asking because you obviously got a lot of experience. You're making me wonder, like, I'm at the end of so our power line, we're actually at the very end. We're the last one on the power line. The power poles actually stop at our house. I'm wondering, and there's been some other instances of things in the house, but this has been the most prominent one, is that something you see or hear? Like, is it possible that we're just like things are burning up a little bit from power surges? Is that a normal thing that can happen?
Yeah, not only possible, probable.
Interesting.
Yeah, because you got to think the voltage, the typical house has a 200 amp service. It's running on 12240, right? So as those spikes come in, it's hitting those electronics. It's hitting the electronics. It's hitting the electronics. And over time, electronics don't last forever. I mean, they just don't, right?
Yeah.
So it's absolutely possible that what you're experiencing is just surges that are coming in and eventually burn out appliances. And we've had a lot of cases of this over the years. Where we've had clients and customers who have said, this is great. I've been replacing this washing machine, or I've been replacing this dishwasher every 3 years for 10 years. And now I haven't replaced one in 4.
Oh yeah. We've had to replace motherboards on dishwashers multiple times. I mean, the dishwasher runs fine, but the motherboard gets fried.
Yeah.
And we've had the same thing on the oven. It's the dishwasher and the oven particularly. We've actually gone to more analog type washer and dryer. But that has not occurred to me. I just assumed cheap products breaking down. That's actually very fascinating.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, and just maybe we should have even started with this, but just to tell everybody how the EMP Shield actually works. So basically, there's a clamping level. So basically, what that means is on any given, we make 80 different models. So on any given model, there's a particular point where, as the shield is monitoring your home, when the voltage exceeds the clamping point, then it will shunt or ground, send that energy down your grounding rod. So all it's doing is monitoring the system. When it gets too much electricity, when it hits that clamping point, it's dumping the excess electricity. It's not letting it get more than that. That's
all right. So let's back up again a little bit. So we've got these variety of problems. I just kind of want to summarize, because most people think EMP and they think something going off in the sky. And as we said, that's a low probability, high impact. But then there's all these other events that are higher probability, maybe lower impact, but that are actually potentially causing us money, causing us challenges. You talked about lightning, obviously, which in some areas of the country is a very real threat. It's causing real economic damage. And so obviously we're moving towards, okay, well, what do we do to protect ourselves? And that is to have some sort of shield, some sort of protection. Tell us. So go ahead, and you're going to maybe back up a little from that and just the world of protection, because I assume it works in different ways, from what's in the line to what can come out of the sky or lightning. How do we think about this?
Yeah, I don't know that I completely understand the question you're asking me.
Okay.
Are you asking me to talk about the different types of protection?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to back up and approaching protection a little bit before we get into we kind of got down the appliance road a little bit. So I was trying to back us up a little bit and just think about, protection in general. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, you're talking about from electricity particularly?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So nationally, most of the building codes are now beginning to require that everything's protected. So all new homes, all new businesses, and I don't know if it's reached every state yet, but it's reached mine. It's reached Colorado. So I know that very soon, whole house surge protection will be just like a smoke detector in a house.
Really? Okay.
It would be required on everything.
Okay.
And there's lots of different models. There's lots of different companies out there. And I think the differences between many of them are just simply how they perform and how's the warranty work in it. I think those are the real big difference. There's a lot of, like I said, a lot of them out there. And regardless of which one you buy, make sure you protect yourself, because again, the grid is unstable. Fact. I think you'd have a hard time getting anybody to argue that, right? In reference to when you start talking about an actual EMP, now there's other ways they deal with it besides surge. They have filtering, as I mentioned before, Faraday cages as before. But again, if you put something in a Faraday cage, you can't use it.
What is a Faraday cage?
Okay, got it. So a Faraday cage is basically, think of it as a metal bubble. And like a lot of people like to use trash cans, Army military cans, tinfoil, all kinds of things. Even some of the higher end stuff use copper mesh. And so basically they put something inside of this bubble so that when the surge comes, it surrounds the bubble but can't enter it.
Okay.
And so again, a galvanized trash can is probably the greatest example of a Faraday cage that people use. They buy it, they line it with like foam or something like that, drop their items in it, put the lid back on, and now it's protected. But the problem is you're not using it. It's in there.
Low tech. I get that. That's cool. And of course, our audience is going to love that. There's low tech solutions.
Oh yeah.
So what would you do? You'd put in there like a radio, so you've got a backup radio, say. You'd put in maybe a backup phone or something in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Maybe a backup laptop, maybe even, some flash drives with all my files I've been saving for all of these years, all of these old, books on file or whatever it is. So yeah, just anything electronic. Ham radio would be right at the top of the list. I think probably everybody puts a ham radio down inside of there.
Does a metal safe, like if you have a safe that's built out of metal, does that useful?
No. I'll tell you why.
So a galvanized trash can is useful, but a metal safe is not. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So
the reason for this is the rubber gasket. Okay, so you've got, when you open that safe door, you've got a big rubber gasket in there. And so when that safe door closes, there's still an opening in that rubber. A metal trash can works so good because you've got a metal lid snapping down onto a metal enclosure.
Okay. Interesting. So that little of because those things are pretty tight. Interesting. That little of a
but it's not complete.
It's not complete.
But the other thing here too, I want to make sure I stress to everybody in the audience tonight, is that it also matters the size of footprint. So let's talk about your cell phone for an example.
Okay.
If it's not plugged into the wall and it's just sitting there next to you in an EMP, I mean, the big EMP, right? A hemp was to happen, chances are your phone's fine. It's just not a big enough footprint to induce that much electricity. Same with like a laptop. Okay. Now, if it's plugged into the wall, you're done, right? Because it'll follow that line right down in. So footprint matters too. So the chances of your safe, of the items inside your safe being hurt are not good, depending on where you're at in reference to ground zero, latitude, longitude. I mean, there's just, well, what kind of building are you sitting in? Does it have a metal roof on it? I mean, there's just a lot of variables to that. But
yeah, okay.
I would not be super scared that my stuff in my safe would be damaged. I guess I'll put it to you like that.
You'd feel, even though it's not totally protected. So if you're on like a metal roof, then I mean, I think we're getting a lot of like common things here. So a metal roof is a layer of protection from an overhead, a solar flare, or a strategic EMP. You're saying metal roof is going to give you a level of protection.
Absolutely.
So if you got a metal roof and then you got a safe inside your house, or you got a galvanized can in the basement with some of these items, you've got a pretty good level of protection.
Yeah, I have my main shop that I work in out here at the farm is a Quonset hut. So it's a metal Quonset hut. I can't make a phone call in there. I just can't. Right. Yeah. And that's a good way to know. If you struggle making a phone call where you're at, and you go outside and it's fine, that's good. I mean, there's good attenuation there.
So the barn wrapped in metal is a pretty good spot.
It's a great Faraday cage.
How about your car in the garage under a metal roof?
Yeah, so the car is an interesting thing. There was a big study that was done not too long ago where the government took a bunch of, not a bunch, a couple Chevy trucks, a couple Dodge trucks, a couple Ford trucks, and did a big testing on them. Some of them started again and some of them didn't. It burned some of them up and some of them didn't. And I'm not the scientist, and if you ever want to, I can get a PhD scientist in this to come talk to you on your show. But what he would tell you is the problem is there's so many variables. What angle are you to the EMP? What ground surface are you riding on? Right? What direction are you traveling? All have some variables in the effects of the EMP.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of well, it's not biology, it's not quite chemistry, a lot of physics, I guess, in this case.
There's a lot,
a lot of nuances to the physics in this case of what happens. Okay, so we're talking about some kind of just natural protections built in. You got metal roofs, you got boxes from kind of, solar flares or overhead EMP. Let's come back to those household surges, and I don't know if this applies to lightning as well. Can you explain a little bit? You were talking about clamps and whatnot. Can you explain a little bit about how you're creating protection from that kind of EMP injury? Yeah.
So think about it. And a really good example I could give you is, how you have an overpressure valve on your hot water heater?
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody knows it
explode. Right.
It works exactly the same way. The pressure builds up in that overpressure valve. Once it reaches a particular pressure, it lets off that pressure so that your hot water tank don't explode.
Got it.
The EMP shield works exactly the same way. It's got a valve in it. Now it's an electronic valve, right? Instead of a, like what you'd have on a hot water heater.
Right.
But it works exactly the same way. It's going to sense, it's constantly sensing your entire system, your whole house. It's on all the time. And it's just monitoring. And when the water pressure builds in the tank to a certain level, it clamps or shunts the over voltage. No different than the hot water heater works. Exactly the same way.
Good description. So where does this go in a system? Does this have to go out before the power meter, but before where does it go in a system?
Yeah. So we make lots of different models, and we have co-ops, electrical co-ops around the country who are installing these devices into the smart meter outside their house. So it's going out on the electrical box. But we also have most of them that go on houses, go right at the breaker box. They're wired into 220 amp breakers. And 2 is important because electrical system has the L1 and the L2 side, right? So we want to make sure we're protecting both sides. And so it's just stuck right there on the breaker box through that. We have other models that protect like data. So like right here, as I'm sitting here talking to you, my computer has a data model with the data line coming in from my internet, because every wire is an antenna, right? Every single one is a way for it to get into. So there's a lot of places that it can go on, but typically it would go on the breaker box most often.
Wow. Okay. All right. What happens if we get into a grid down situation? How does Shield?
Yeah.
Or if you are off grid, I guess.
Yeah. I love this question. Yeah, Josh, this might be the single question I get the most. What good is it if the grid goes down? Right? Nobody has power anyway. What's the point?
Right.
Well, first, if you have any kind of alternative energy like I do, I live completely off grid. I have 8 EMP shields on my property, protecting my well, protecting my solar, protecting my charge controllers, those kinds of things. So if in a case you have any kind of off-grid power or even a generator or any of those things, it would ensure that device was protected. So you would continue to have that backup source of power. But there's another big reason too. How far down the list do you suppose you would be, Josh? You personally in your life, if a grid down happened, all the power went off, let's say 6 months later, they get the power back on. And that's probably a best case scenario, by the way, because where those transformers come from. But let's say, how far down the list do you suppose you are in their level of priority?
Well, I can tell you from my area. I can tell you about us because we went through a multi-week power outage a few years ago. I think it was because of fires, and we were literally multi-week just because we're at the end of the line. Whatever line we're on was at the end of the line, so to speak. Yeah, and so depending on where you're at, it depends. We were literally the last ones to get power while we were watching everybody in our county come back on with power day after day after day. So it depends on where you're at. I know for us, we're last priority just because of our remoteness, the line, everything else.
Yeah. So if you had protection, they would turn the power on and your power would come back on. The other thing is that there's a safety issue here. If you can imagine, and we talked about 50,000 volts per square meter a little bit ago. Yeah. Did you know there are super EMP weapons out there now that are 200,000 volts? So if you take even the small one, 50,000 volts of energy penetrating through the E3, right? As it just goes wave after wave after wave after wave, penetrating, the chance of fire is great.
Things are heating up.
Things are heating up. So the ability to deal with that, even though there's not grid power, it gets you kind of first in line to have your power turned back on in a lot of ways, and it protects your house from fire. So there's a lot of reasons to have it regardless of what the grid is doing.
Yeah. No, and especially as we're becoming, all of us are more and more technological. We're more and more reliant to communicate on a variety of different devices to get information, to know what's going on in the world, right? And those things are sensitive. So it just, besides just power and day-to-day functioning, turning the lights on and all of that, human communication is important, and a lot of these things are susceptible. So I think by now it's obvious to everybody that you're involved with producing in a company, EMP Shield, in producing various forms of protection. How did you get into this as a business and into creating products to help protect from EMP? I mean, I'll say threats. I don't even like to use the word threats because really there's so much more than just the we'll say military threat. There's really so much more, as we've talked about. But how'd you get into this?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting story. So, as you know, because you know my story, I lost my career over COVID. Yeah. And because I just wasn't going to play. And so, but I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and I had the inventor of the EMP Shield. Now, this was model 1. We're at 9.5 now, right? It's progressed a lot over the years, but come to me and said, hey, I can't get this project off the ground. we're not selling very many. Can you help me? Well, I'm a business guy. And so, which is what I do for the company today. I handle all the business side of the company. And so I'm not all that interested. It's hokey, et cetera, et cetera. And then one day he was going to meet with Strategic Command to have a conversation about them. And he invited me along, and I'm like, all right, I'll go. So I went with him. We were sitting in a room with a bunch of people with a bunch of medals on their chest. And one of them said, and I quote, he said, "Why has no one ever thought of it like this before?" Well, being an entrepreneur, I'm like, you got my attention,
Yeah.
And so I agreed to raise them all of their capital to start up the company, which I did. I agreed to get the processes in place, do the hiring, get a lot of that stuff all in place. And I just stuck around because I love the topic. I love that we're helping people. I love that there's just more to it out there. So I don't come from that background. I come from the business side, but it was a good fit for me. I was a prepper already and going to be a homesteader, working towards it at least, and so it just kind of worked out that way,
That's pretty cool. What, being that you by now have had more experiences, say with military and government than that first one in the room with some military brass, what does our government say about this? What does the military, what are they doing? I think that gives us insight, can give us insight to what we should be thinking about, because they got a lot more knowledge than we do on all of these elements. So what did you see, or what are you seeing that they're doing that speaks to all of us out here?
Yeah, well, I can tell you with 100% certainty that the government believes that a high altitude EMP strike is imminent on the United States of America someday. They've been very clear about this. They are hardening many, many things, and lots of different ways. Again, there's lots of different ways they go about doing it. They believe it to be an absolute credible threat. Now that's kind of their job, though, Josh. Right? I mean, it's kind of it's a little bit kind of their job, I think, but they believe it. And, I could give you lots and lots of stories. I've been to the Pentagon several times. I've had these conversations, with them, but I'll tell you that they've given absolute zero attention to the other side of the equation. So yeah, we can protect, Air Force One, but they've done nothing to protect the power grid. They've done nothing to protect the transformers. They've done nothing to protect, the electrical suppliers, right? The nuclear power plants, the coal-fired plants. There's really nothing on that level that's had very much attention. The military's had a fair amount of attention.
So I was going to say, are they protecting their own resources, though?
Yeah.
From the military threat and the daily potential threat, are they investing in protecting their own infrastructure?
Yes.
From all of this?
Yes.
So that tells you a lot right there. If they're willing to put their resources into protecting, government infrastructure, military infrastructure, that to me says a lot.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting thing. The EMP Commission, which is a commission that's put together to study these kinds of things and to make recommendations, said in their declassified report in 2018 that if an EMP happened, a high altitude EMP happened, 90% of the population would be dead in 12 months. And again, you got to remember, you don't see it, you don't hear it, you don't feel it. But why they projected everyone would die is because you have no power anymore. The trucks don't run anymore. The hospitals don't work anymore. Nothing works. And so they've done the study. They know what the outcome, of this is. If the big one was to ever happen. But I really want to stress to your audience this, because I'm not a doom and gloomer.
Right. And neither are we here at Homesteading Family. We're always, what's the problem? Identify it. And then what are positive solutions?
Yeah. I have 8 of these devices on my own personal home. And I have them because the electricity is not consistent. And it isn't in solar either. I'm off grid, right? A solar panel can produce 6 watts of power and it can produce 150 watts of power.
Yeah.
While you have charge controllers in the system, right? And so I want to protect my investment. Number one reason why I did it is those issues. It's just a bonus that I get to protect against the other things too, Right. But the truth is I didn't do it for all that.
Yeah. Well, and again, for me, looking at this, it's kind of like a no-brainer in a life where we are more and more electricity dependent. We have more and more devices, and the reality is everything's more electronic. I mean, it's frustrating sometimes for me. I'm like, I went back to a 2006 truck because I was just tired of all this stuff in a newer truck. But we're not going to get rid of it. It's, if we're going to participate in the modern world, then we're going to utilize a lot of these tools that are becoming more and more electronic. And so there's a place where just as common sense to say, where do we put in some of the protections? And I think especially talking to our audience here, where there's more and more people that are rural, and I think some of the rural systems have a lot more of those fluctuations in the power, and more, at least we do. And I've lived rural for over 20 years, and every place I've lived on grid has had variabilities of surges and outages and just different issues. So it just makes sense that you want to do something to create a little bit of protection in my mind.
Yeah.
So one last question, so you're behind the company EMP Shield. We'll tell everybody a little bit more about that and how to connect a little bit. But talk about how your products are made, and specifically, are they American made? Are they mostly American made, or where you guys get with that? Because there's a lot of options out there.
Yes.
And we want to know a little bit more about yours.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I would say is that the conditions, the geopolitical conditions in the world make this answer change from time to time. I'll explain it all. Okay. But so we're 100% of the parts that go into an EMP shield is sourced here in America.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're all manufactured here in America, right? So about 98% of the products are actually that go into it are actually manufactured in America. There's a couple parts that sometimes we can get in America, and sometimes we have to go elsewhere, depending on what happens to be going on at any given moment. We've worked really hard to strengthen our supply chain. So, for example, I can get a gas glass discharge tube, which is a part that goes in some of them. I can get it in America, but I also can get it in Croatia, and I also can get it in a couple other places. We do not buy anything from China.
Yeah,
that has been a board of director decision that they weren't going to source it that way. So none of it comes there, but so 100% sourced in America, 98% manufactured in America, and maybe 100 depending upon the month, because it just changes.
Doing what you can. So I'm curious, just because we're in the middle of this environment, and we'll approach it not from opinion of good or bad, but we got the tariff conversation happening. You're involved with manufacture. And I think this is the moment just to hear from somebody like you that actually is boots on the ground and knows, is this going to affect you?
100%.
And how?
So depending upon where they put the tariffs on, right? And depending upon what country. So let's, they just did Canada, for example. I don't get any parts from Canada, but let's just suppose I did get it from Canada. Canada putting a matching 25% tariff back, as all that's in the news right now, obviously is going to drive the price up. Business owners aren't just going to absorb the cost. The cost is going to get pushed on. Now, I can make the argument whether it's good or bad or whatever it is, but it will absolutely affect the price. Then it comes to me, I pay X amount for this part. Let me give you an example. My enclosures that they're built in, the price of those have gone up 400% in 5 years. 400%. So again, that just continues to raise the price of the device, and it will get passed on to the consumer at the end. So for me as a manufacturer, any of those influxes that go on will impact me. But then also we could be getting into some spots. China said today that they're ready for the trade war or any other war that comes on. And so again, I don't get from them. However, they will just pass it right along, and then you and me, the guy in the middle, the little guy, is going to pay the price for most of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. I'm not looking to draw conclusions other than just it's helpful. A lot of us, you hear everything in the news and you don't know who's blowing what up from what side of the conversation. And so to hear from somebody that's involved, that just real world, I think that's informative. You guys, this has been really educational. You got me thinking and realizing how even some of the problems that we've experienced in our own house probably are relative to this conversation in EMP and why it's probably worth investing in a little bit of protection to save, like for our house, from having to replace appliances. And so I love this. It's been very, very helpful. I'm going to do a little bit of digging. Where do you want people to go to find out more about you or EMP Shield?
Yeah, so let's do both. You can find me. I have a YouTube channel called Life Done Free, where we just, pretty much just deal with homesteading, what we're doing, getting off grid, all of those kind of things. But that's where you can find me personally. But as far as EMP Shield, you can go to empshield.com. And by the way, if you put Homesteading Family in as a discount code, it'll give you $50 off every single unit that you purchase. You just use Homesteading Family.
Cool.
And yeah, which would be super, super cool. So you can find it just empshield.com, and there's tons of information. There's a huge EMP library. You want to read the EMP commission reports and the stuff the government talks about, it's all there. And then you can also browse, obviously, the units and the different types of products that we make, but that's where you can find me.
Cool. You guys, listeners, viewers, will get you all those links in the show notes for you there, so you don't have to remember them. And go check out, get educated about EMP. I'm going to dive in. This has spurred me on, and realizing it may solve problems I'm having right now, besides thinking about some of these other things. Go check that out. But also go check out TAG and lifedonefree.com and what they're doing. It's really, really inspiring in just the whole conversation of homesteading and freesteading, as TAG's putting it. And I think you'll find some good knowledge and inspiration there. Been great hanging with you guys today. Out of time. But thanks, TAG, for coming and sharing with us. And for me, this has really cleared up a lot. Again, most of us, I think, tend to think of EMP as some possible thing in the sky one day. This has been very informative. And so I feel educated and empowered. I hope everybody here does. So thanks for giving us your time. And I look forward to the next time we connect.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. I appreciate your time.
You bet. Thanks everybody. We'll see you soon.